The thing I worry about with the Kenny Atkinson's hire, just to jump in, no podcast experience at all. No podcast experience.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
That's right.
Oh, sorry. Chris was telling us in our ear to scoot, and apparently
you thought it meant you.
Yeah. Am I good with the monitor here?
Oh, yeah. I see we're in frame. We're
okay. The Sactown Sports Kings insider, Brenden Nunes, with the classic slam Isaiah Thomas Celtics cover. Can't blame him for that whatsoever. Isaiah wasn't his fault. He was playing on the Celtics.
Yeah, as I'm reading it, everybody else that's on the right side of there, Westbrook, Paul, Curry, they're all still, and Gordon Hayward, Miles Turner, Eric Gordon, they're all still playing.
Gordon Hayward, mostly.
Yeah, but they're in the league.
Yeah, they are in the league. So are you, Brenden. How are you?
I'm doing well. Doing well, gentlemen. We're getting to Newsweek. I'm excited.
Well, we had some last week, and I will ask you, and no shame in the game here, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, 1 being, how surprised were you when you heard the Malik Monk news?
Probably like a holy crap level.
Yeah.
Maybe that's around like a 7-8.
Yeah,
maybe a little bit higher than that. I think that the most surprising thing is just go test the market at least a little bit, figure out what's out there. Legally at the point that could not be done. I'm sure that happened a little bit. I'm sure Malik's agent has players that are on Orlando or things like that. And some conversations I'm sure take place that give him an idea. But I thought at very least you go figure out what is Orlando going to be willing to offer. And it made me wonder, maybe there's an aspect of Orlando wanting to talk to other people and then get to Malik Monk. And is there an aspect of he appreciated being really wanted by a team? And clearly Sacramento was there. Seemed like they had this 4-year 78, the max they could offer, on the table for a little while. It didn't seem like it took much consideration on their end. And I would bet being wanted somewhere, and he's talked about how, kind of up and down his NBA journey has been up to this point. I would bet being wanted and feeling like he kind of has built something here a little bit. And maybe I'm going into the cliches here, but almost unfinished business.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, something we speculated on that where he said at his exit meeting that he wanted to start. It was, but he also then kind of qualified it, look like I'll also do what's ever best for the team. So he's a starter, I think, in this league, can be. Do you think there's any, hey, one of our carrots besides 4 and 78 is we're going to make you a starter?
I would be surprised if they promised that. I think that, to me, Malik has always said he wants to start, but that he will do whatever it takes. And I think that that's very genuine. I appreciate the transparency. I think a lot of guys would BS you and say, no, I'm fine coming off the bench. Like, Malik is transparent about that. But I think if you're still playing 35 minutes and you're closing games, to me, that should be enough. And maybe that's different in Malik's mind, and I can't really speak to that. But I'd be shocked if they gave him a promise. Also because there's trades that we're expecting them to at least be active in the market in some of these discussions. What if that's a 2-guard they bring in? What if it is Zach LaVine, which that's a whole different conversation, how much you like that. But then what happens to Malik if you made a promise with him? So I would bet that they didn't make a promise with him, but I could see how that's in the cards. I also think that him coming off the bench makes a lot of sense, stagger the ball handlers, and you're still playing starter minutes, closing games.
I have so many questions that I want asked of him or that I want to ask him, and that is one. Because I hear what you're saying, and we talked about this last week, that, hey, if you're still playing 35 minutes, it's not who starts it, it's who closes. Right. So that's the common thread narrative. Hey, Manu Ginobili and Jamal Crawford, but most players want to start. That's what they want to do. And we went into kind of the ether of the whole thing that when you're starting, you're generally on the floor with the best players on your team, which means that you are the chances of you being doubled are less. There's a lot more freedom there at times. When Malik's on the floor in the second unit, he's the focal point, and maybe that's something that he wanted. I do think it's interesting whether or not they promised it to him, but also at this point, the way the team's currently constructed, shouldn't he start? I'm saying if they run the thing back, are we still trying to make a case that Herter's better at the 2 than him, or better placed at the 2, or that Malik being at the 6th man is better than him getting 35 minutes at the 2 with Fox?
I think it's mainly about the inverse, that Kevin Huerter is better with the starters than he would be with the bench.
But
and I would say the same thing with
But how do we know that? Because he sure as hell ain't been great as a starter since the 3-point contest, basically.
Right.
How do we know that putting Huerter on the bench and bringing him off, he's an outside shooter, he's a fireball when he's hot, no hair pun intended. Why is that? And I'm not saying to you, Brent, I think that's a general thought. How do we know Huerter's not good off the or better off the bench?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I guess we don't exactly know. I guess my theory behind it, though, is that he's a guy that needs more playmaking around him, that he can be running through screens, kind of catching and shooting, making cuts and finishing plays rather than being a creator. And I think part of the Malik thing is that he's so good at creating plays. Yeah. And in a way, you're almost minimizing that skill, or you don't need it as much alongside those other starters, which I think is fine. Yes. Yeah. And that's part of what Malik doesn't necessarily say that they made him a better player, but more so that they put him in spots where he could take advantage of the skills that he already had. And I think coming off the bench and having the ball in his hands is part of that. And that's something that I think Herter is just not as skilled at, having the ball in his hands, creating for others. For me, it's really about looking at him and Fox, Malik and Fox. I think you need one of those guys on the floor at all times, because Sabonis's playmaking is great, but you need it from the perimeter. You need a guy that can, dribble out of a double team and sort of penetrate into the paint and things like that. So I think it's really separating those two that really does it. And I don't think Kevin Herter or Keon Ellis or Davion Mitchell are at that point to be able to do that.
It's fair.
I'm sure the result of him allegedly, and we all believe it's happening, agreeing to this deal on Friday helps the Kings front office dramatically. It didn't really necessarily help Malik per se. So it feels like he did them a solid. What do you think the benefit of the early announcement and early signing of this will do for this week and the coming weeks?
I think it just simplifies everything. You don't have to live with this what if. And I would bet that it's already something you don't want to function like making your draft pick based on what's going to happen with Malik Monk necessarily. But now you don't even have to worry about that. The amount of guards that you have on your roster, and there is still stuff up in the air because of the potential trades, as we kind of already mentioned, that I think leaves you to really do whatever you want. My criteria really for anybody bringing draft free agency, just can they play with Fox and Sabonis? That's really all I care about. Positionally, whatever. Can they play with those guys together? And I think Malik adds to that. You don't need that bench playmaking necessarily. So I think it really just simplifies it. You don't have to live with this asterisk, this what if of, okay, here's our fallback plan. If Malik leaves, this is what we're going to do in free agency with our MLE. If he stays, this is what we're going to do with the $5 million or so that we have remaining. Now you can just fully commit to this one side rather than having to live in two potential worlds.
Brenden Nunes, Kings insider for Sactown Sports, joining us. I have questions still, and maybe the biggest one is something we just touched on. So if it's illegal, which it is, not law-wise, but if it's illegal for Malik Monk's agent to speak to other teams and gauge interest and offers before what is it, end of June, July, whatever that is, whatever the deadline is, or the opening of free agency. Okay. If, which we know for a fact, Malik Monk and his team knew probably about 6 months ago that the Kings could give him $4 and $78, why didn't they announce it a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks? Why did they wait? Why? That's the part.
Kings it's Malik waiting, right?
That's what I'm talking about. Why didn't they announce? Why didn't they do it? I can understand maybe why didn't they do it during the year, but if you're not going to even gauge, what was the motivation to not gauge what other teams were going to offer you? And if the answer is because I knew I wanted to be here and I want the Kings to be in the best position, draft and trade and free agent wise, knowing that I'm going to be here, then why wait till last week?
I would bet there were still some conversations being had, conversations that are
right,
maybe not allowed to be had. But we can just be friends with somebody that happens to know some information and pass things along that way. So I think there was reporting that came out about Orlando with how do they feel about Klay Thompson. They're the team that really stands out to me, and I think has throughout the process of what are they going to do. They clearly need a guard. There's a handful of options they could go towards, Klay and Malik being the two that really seem to kind of be at the forefront there. But maybe there was some development there. I mean, that's really what stands out to me, because I agree with you. It seems like something that potentially could have been done the day that it was allowed with how quickly this took place. But wow, I would imagine that in that week, there's just a little bit more conversations of let's just wait half a sec, see if we should entertain some of this a little bit more. And we'll pretend like those conversations didn't take place, but that'd be my guess.
Wonder how he'll answer that.
How he will.
Well, you already You already
Just
said
say-
it. I love Sacramento.
Right.
I'm glad to be here. I wanted to help the
Grass
team.
But then why
Greener.
didn't you do it a month ago?
Yeah.
I mean, I know no
if
one's
he
going to
felt that
press
way,
him.
I feel like from an agent standpoint, you'd probably be like, "Hey, let's wait a sec. Give me a sec
Yeah.
to see what else is
never
going
know.
on."
Yeah.
You
I mean,
know?
do you think he would have had what's the ceiling? What do you think? Detroit, Philly, San Antonio, Orlando, whoever. What's the peak value you think he would have technically received?
Yeah, I mean,
100?
yeah, that's like max that I would think. And that'd be like Detroit. Like I look at what Houston did last offseason, try to bring a bunch of guys in and maybe not fast track the process, but you're ready for this is your core. Let's just start building something. And so I think that would be an overpay for Malik in my mind, 25 mil. I think there's even a question of this contract still needs to be lived up to.
Sure.
I don't think it's just for sure that's going to happen. He has had some inconsistencies. I think 400 is probably about
4
that
years,
max.
100.
Yeah.
By the way,
400.
400 million.
Yeah.
Really? No, I get
4
it.
year 100,
Right.
maybe 25 a year or so. And yeah, I still think that he does need to kind of prove that he's worth this deal. And I think that's an interesting question to me. Coming into last year, a lot of the talk of around him coming into the year was, oh, he's working really hard. He's getting extra work in. And not that hadn't always been the case, but I think we were hearing that a little bit more. And that tends to line up with contract years. Yeah. And I think that can be a thing. And there's also a tendency that happens to some guys after they sign their deal. So I'm curious to monitor that is all.
Well, he's got a lot of stuff coming too. Key to the city, a bunch of free golf.
Crazy.
If we put a tattoo, somebody's named their kid Malik. It isn't. And look, I understand that this type of stuff we should take at face value as Kings fans. We don't get news like this that often. And I think that's partly why me, as somebody who's been scarred over the years, is look, I love it. I have nothing negative to say. Don't get me wrong. But there is that voice in the back of my head. Not that I'm worried about anything. I don't care. I don't care if he stayed here because he and Mike Brown loved to play pickleball together and he didn't want to leave. I don't care. I just, because I'm curious, go, so you took probably $22 million less to come back to a team that you're not guaranteed to start on, which, by the way, if one of those
did make the playoffs,
that did not make the playoffs, whereas let's say Orlando, let's just pull Orlando out. Whereas you could have gone to Orlando and not only made probably significantly more money, but been on a team that did make the playoffs, and you have the best golf courses in the world, and, there's no state tax, so you're making even more money, but you chose to come back here, but you waited, and then you announced it at like a random, okay. I just want to know the story behind the scenes and how it all came about. I just don't know that we ever will.
Yeah, I hope that eventually we'll get a little bit of transparency, but I would imagine that there's a sense of clarity with the Sacramento role in Malik. Like he's hopped around a lot. Again, he's very introspective on like his NBA journey and the ups and downs that kind of took to get to this point, almost being out of the league after his journey in Charlotte, and things like that. And I think that having an understanding of, okay, this is what it looks like in Sacramento. And clearly he enjoyed that role. He enjoyed just everything that came with it, whether that be the coaching staff or the players that he's alongside, the city itself. But I think that he has moved around a lot. And I would imagine that having some sense of stability, knowing what you're going to get. And also we kind of need to account for the next contract. You know, if he's going to another team and that role gets changed, that he clearly is pretty content with at this current spot, even if that may mean starting or little things like that. But I think that the next contract matters in this as well. And he wants to put himself in a spot where he feels like he can optimize his talents because there could still be another big deal coming down the line.
Let's also remember, by the way, Jason, I should add this. His agent's Jeff Schwartz.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Schwartz, along with Rich Paul, those are the two guys. Those are the two most powerful agents in the league. Legally, can Jeff go, hey, Daryl Morey, so what are you going to give Malik? But they're going to have conversations about, hey, and then it's something like, hey, what do you think the ballpark is? Are we talking,
they're pretty dialed in on that stuff.
They've got code words. They've got all kinds of stuff because you do me a solid, I'll do you a solid type of thing. So I look, I'm not trying to accuse his agent of doing anything illegal, but pretty sure he didn't just blindly go, let's take the Kings offer. Let's not worry about any other teams.
Yeah.
Like there's
they had to know.
They would definitely have gauged the market, whatever that may have looked like. And I would imagine that means that, maybe that 100 million was not on the table.
Yeah. I mean, there's competition, right? Clay, Paul George, like some other people that I'm sure are coveted that could have impacted this. But Brenden, if we look at, I think it's safe to say Malik, Keegan, Fox, and Sabonis are kind of what they've identified as the core four. They all had really good years last year, but that wasn't enough. So what do you think is next? Obviously, there's a route to pick at 13. There's a route to move that pick with some other things. What do you think, if you're kind of making your best guess, is what they try to do next?
I think they need more like size, length, athleticism, some complementary pieces to those guys. I think that's a solid core to work with, but you definitely need more in a Western Conference that's pretty wide open. I think that you can leverage that 13th pick in trade conversations, and I think that they've been a team that's pretty advantageous, is how I would describe it. Like the Sabonis deal, sure, Tyrese went out. Obviously, that's a big piece. They didn't include any picks. They kept that flexibility moving forward. That's why the LaVine thing's kind of interesting to me. I'm like, well, if you didn't move any picks, then do you keep more flexibility? It's, I don't love the idea of LaVine, but something like that, or Kuzma, for example, takes less salary. So you would still retain some of your assets to then make a future move. So I think that they could try to take a big swing. I would expect that they try at least scour the market to do so. I think that they've been trying to do that for a couple years, really. But you got to make sure that's the right guy. But in the meantime, you can do small stuff that still keeps your treasure chest of assets somewhat available in order to capitalize things that come up in the future. But I think from here, it's okay. Internal improvements, I think, are set for the most part. You retain Malik. What are you going to get from Keegan? Growth from, I still think Domas and De'Aaron can get better as players. They're fairly young. But externally, what else can we bring in now? Because there's a need for depth. I really think there's a need for length, and that showed in the 6 losses to the Pelicans to me.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah.
Wanted to forget about that.
Brenden Nunes, Kings Insider, joining us right here on Sactown Sports. Well, let's talk about Zach LaVine. There is no doubt that he is an absolutely elite scorer when he is healthy, but that is part of the key. When he is healthy, he's had trouble staying on the floor. He's recovering as we speak from an injury. Last year, he played in 25 games. He did play 77 the year before, 67, 58, 60, 47 prior to that, not counting the COVID year. But not a defender. Not really. I mean, you're getting elite scoring, but even if, which I believe they could get him for Herter and Barnes, I don't even think they'd need to throw the pick in. My guess is that Chicago is probably offering that, and if there's even a LaVine conversation, Sacramento's asking for more draft capital, but you kind of lock yourself up. You mentioned the picks. You mentioned that there's still some room to do whatever, but you're not getting help on defense. Right. You now bring in a guy who's the highest paid player on the team. You now have triple max guys basically, and you did nothing. In fact, you probably LaVine for Harrison Barnes downgraded a little bit defensively. So you say that the LaVine thing is interesting. You also said you're not a huge fan of it. So is it interesting, like sticking your hand in a blender, or is there a positive I'm not seeing?
Yeah, hand in the garbage disposal. Yeah. What would happen if I click that button?
It's interesting.
All right.
I mean, I think the offense really gets me because I think he's actually a perfect offensive fit. I think that his whole thing in Chicago is that he's asked to do a little bit too much as a playmaker, and I think that role specifically creating for others would be simplified in Sacramento. You could just do a little bit more secondary, tertiary stuff when it comes to playmaking, setting up for other guys. Playing off dribble handoffs could be a little bit of a learning curve, but I think he's a smart offensive player. He shoots really well off movement. He cuts ridiculously well. Obviously, transition would just be phenomenal to watch. Fox, Malik, and Zach LaVine in transition with Domas coming up the court. Like, that sounds fun to me. Offensively, easy fit. I could see it. Defensively, there's a question, and the contract is that you're in that spot. Is that core enough to take you to the top of the West? Are you competing with the Denver, with Minnesota, with Dallas up there? I don't think so, and the fact that you wouldn't have to likely put out too much draft capital in that deal, I think is what makes it intriguing to me, because you would retain your options, like I said, but financially it does put you in a weird spot where any salaries you're coming back, you're getting really close to that second apron. And I don't know that that's a team good enough that you'd be willing to do that. So it does seem like more of a desperation move, almost in a way, like we have to do something now. And I see how he's a type of move that maybe isn't locking you into something horribly when it comes to draft capital outwards, but it does seem like more of a desperation, getting pushed, like we need to do something now. I guess this wouldn't cost too much to do, but I don't know that. I think whatever big salary you add, if you're going that caliber, it needs to be the right guy.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that LaVine is on both ends.
So I asked Dave this on Friday. How would you rank 3 people that have been linked, whether how true these rumors are, but you just talked about LaVine, but between LaVine and think about obviously contract, age, health, all sides. But LaVine, Ingram, and Kuzma, how would you rank those as far as your favorite fit for this team?
Yeah, it's funny. These are definitely the hot 3 names, right? I'd go LaVine last for reasons we just talked about. And I'd go Ingram second for similar stuff. I think contractually it's fairly similar.
You're descending, so you're saying LaVine's the least
LaVine
attractive.
3, Ingram 2.
Okay, I got you.
And the deal the extension that he wants, which definitely is part of that conversation, I think is similar financially to what we talking about with LaVine. But I like the length that Ingram provides. I think he's a really smart player. There is some of that playmaking. The shooting can be a question, but I think when he was on the Lakers, which I know a while ago at this point, we've seen him be okay off ball as a shooter. And I think if that took a step, he's the right type of guy. I think he fits the timeline. I could see him being the last piece that I could talk myself into more than LaVine. But Kuzma's the one for me because of the finances.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. The contract is so much more affordable to go out and get, and you still have that flexibility to go and do more. Like I'm kind of talking about, say that takes you 2 picks. It takes you 13 in a future protected first. You still have 3-4 more to work with in the future. If you retain say Kevin Huerter is the one that goes in the deal, you want to bump Malik into that starting spot, or you want to move Keon, you're retaining Harrison Barnes or Kevin Huerter, either one, and that guy gets moved to a bench spot. I think these guys get talked about like they're nothing now. They're really valuable NBA players.
That's
and
right.
The second they get traded away, it's going to be like, oh, well, now how do we find a Harrison Barnes for our bench?
That's right.
So I think being able to retain one of those guys and maintain flexibility because Kuzma's on that smaller deal, while also himself as a player, I get hung up on the defense he played in the bubble, which is a long time ago, but there's a defensive player somewhere in there. And my faith in Mike Brown, I think, does make me think he could pull that out a little bit. But Kuzma adds some versatility on both ends. I think that he could fit well within this offense. And just when it comes to the finances, how all the books would lay out, I think it gives you the most flexibility maintained in the future.
Kuzma signed 3 more years after this, counting this coming year. 23.5 to 21.4 to 19.4 on a descending deal. I couldn't agree with you more. It comes down to, like, especially with LaVine and even Ingram to a point. To me, I know there aren't too many absolutes in this business, but guys, I'll put you both on the spot. And I just want to, before I do that, say I wouldn't get it. So I'm not trying to make you look silly. Can you guys name me the last NBA champion that did not have 1, if not in most cases 2, lockdown defenders that were in the starting lineup? Name me the last NBA champion that did not have at least 1, if not 2, all defense, first, second, or third team caliber defenders. Because I can't.
Did Toronto? They had Kawhi.
Toronto had Kawhi, and then
second one, I don't know.
I got to look at
OG, Pascal.
Did they? Yeah, that's true. Guys, the Celtics this year, the Nuggets, Golden State, and Klay Thompson and Draymond.
Actually,
Green.
all defended. Did the Nuggets?
The Nuggets had they had Aaron Gordon and
Bruce
KCP.
Brown.
Did they take? Maybe I'm doing semantics.
They're
did they
close
make the teams?
though.
Sure,
Yeah.
I would say they're in,
But
again,
their caliber.
Their
of it,
caliber,
yeah.
exactly.
And the Warriors, like, I guess it's just Draymond,
But even just Draymond,
generation,
but Klay
yeah.
was right there,
Right, right.
on exactly.
And KD actually, when they were winning
Yeah.
the second, he was really good.
That's my
defensively.
problem, is that that's as close to an absolute in the NBA as there is. Like, you have to have it. If you don't have it, you're Portland with Dame Lillard. You're Houston with James Harden. You're Dallas with Luka Doncic. I mean, and by the way, they made the finals. I'm not saying, I understand Kings fans right now are like, hey, moron, we'd love that. But I think the idea is, again, winning a championship in this time frame with Sabonis and Fox before they're 35.
Yeah.
Don't you kind of have to say, we can't make any major moves without adding, we got to find a lockdown.
But would we say, like, if they had won one, and like people might say they didn't have, like, isn't Fox and Keegan really close to that?
I don't disagree with you.
If we're kind of lumping like Gordon, they didn't make it.
Keegan has the potential.
Fox is pretty good.
And Fox led the league in steals, and I've talked about this before. That doesn't get enough love as blocks.
Yep.
Half the time goes back to the other team. Steals 100% of the time, you retain possession. If you lead the league in steals, I think you should automatically be a top 3. At least one of the 3 teams. So I hear you. I'm leading somewhere.
I think the other side, though, is that it doesn't have to be the star players. Like, if we take the Denver example, KCP and Aaron Gordon, these guys aren't your stars.
No, they're not.
You could go get a bad example right now, but Alex Caruso, or like something like that.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be the stars, I guess. And that's the Kuzma move, right? If you do the Kuzma move, you still can function. Okay, can we still go get a Royce O'Neal? Can we get Matisse Thybulle might not be good enough to fit in that conversation, but can we still go figure out some of those complementary pieces? Because I think the defense it doesn't have to be from the stars. The stars can't weigh you down, which I think is that Sacramento does a fine job in that aspect. But I think some of these complementary guys can be the ones to lift you there, and maybe Keon.
Yeah, and it feels like
voice went up.
Well, that's the thing. We've been saying Barnes, Herter, and I'm sure they are coveted. Whether like it doesn't have to be every team.
They're good players.
One. Yeah, but is there any appetite you think for Davion, Sasha, Keon? Like it may not bring the Kuzma type or whatever, but are those guys they could move?
Yeah, I would throw Colby in there too. Mm-hmm. I think that those are the type of guys where if an opposing team is looking at a deal and they're like, these are really close, like I'm going to need you to throw Keon in, or I'm going to need you to throw Colby in, and Sasha is, I think, valuable from a trade matching or a salary matching standpoint. And like, he's not negative value in my mind. You look at Micic, I think is the guy that went from OKC to Charlotte, goes to Charlotte. All of a sudden he's putting up numbers.
Right.
I think that Sasha's in a weird spot where if he got more run, I think that he's an NBA player. There's something there. And so I think that Davion is a guy that probably within that group I'd look at as potentially having the most value. I would say that Keon is in there too. I think Keon's contract is viewed as really valuable. I think that's the type of thing that GMs would look at and be like, God, I would love to have that deal on my books. So I think that those guys could have value, and Davion specifically on a younger team where they could give him a little bit more freedom.
Lastly, we're talking about a ton of guys. What if I told you that there was a guy available rather cheap that made in the $23 million? No, it's not Ben Simmons. $23 million range. 48% shooter, 36 behind the arc, makes about 2 per game. But he also can give you 2.5 blocks a game as well. Has been all defense. Maybe a little older, but also a guy who can stretch the floor as well as a big.
I think I know where we're going here.
He's rumored to be available.
In Milwaukee?
How would you fit Brook Lopez on this team?
Okay, so the Sabonis at the 5 thing to me, I think that stays. And I just can't see
really
Brook Lopez
because of Miles Turner. It's always Miles Turner.
Well, this is just how the Kings run their offense.
Guy.
They need to get better on defense,
sure.
But this is their offense,
yes.
And I think that's what carries them. And I think that it's hard for me to envision even like this goes to Edey or Filipowski, some draft guys, and I think Brook Lopez falls in the same thing. I can't imagine these guys ever running off a drrible handoff. Now, that doesn't have to be necessary. You could get away with 5-10 minutes in a game, maybe, where you run both of them together. I wouldn't. His contract's a lot, and that's what would stop me from the idea of I like him as a backup big that you could also sneak minutes next to Sabonis.
23, though, is a lot for a backup.
It is. That's where I'm at.
But you could play 3 guys that are 6'5" in your backcourt if you have Lopez and Sabonis on your front line. Because that whole LaVine, Monk, Fox thing.
It is the type of guy that I would like as a backup big for sure.
Yeah.
It's just too much for a backup.
And you're not a believer in Sabonis at the 4, huh?
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not. Yeah.
You're going to be working hard all week long. I want to remind you, Alan Stiles will be at Public House 5 to 7 for the draft as well. Brendan, Frankie, who we'll be having on later this week as well. Want to remind you, let me just list that out here. Frankie will join us tomorrow. Bobby, what do we call him? Not brackets.
Draft kits.
Bobby Draft Kits. Bobby Gerald will join us Wednesday. Of course, we'll have Sam Amick on Thursday to give us all the postmortem on the draft and possibly trade. Last thing for you, Brenden Nunes. Will the Kings be making a draft pick on Wednesday?
I would bet no, but if they do, the guy will be 22 years old. There's too many guys that are at least 22 in this draft.
It's a Monty specialty.
Yeah.
Would you quantify this draft as being more on the thinner side or thick with talent?
I would say like it's flat is the term that I've heard a lot, is that I don't think there's very many peaks,
right? But
there's a lot of role players. I feel like everybody's talking about this a bad draft. That's fine at the top. There's no clear star talent.
So not thin,
there's a lot
not
of roles,
thin, but
though.
Flat actually is a good word. And if I'm the draft or I'm the draft people in general, maybe I visit my friends at upsizematters.com because I got to be honest with you, that's where you can really thicken things up. Carmichael Dave here. Thank you, Brent. Poor Brenden didn't know what he was walking into, but I appreciate that. UpsizeMatters.com. Listen, they say circumference is just such a big priority, and that's what they say. 9 out of 10 doctors say. And why not go see my friend Dr. Jack Friedlander in Roseville, Dr. Joel Pash in San Francisco. Thank you, sir. And all my friends at UpsizeMatters.com, where you can get a free consultation, and the procedure can be done on the same day as that consultation. Also, Chris, don't think I didn't see you perk up, right? You caught that right away, went over to the board. I appreciate that. Look, these are real doctors. This is a semi-permanent, long-lasting procedure. So simple, so easy, so quick. Whether you are on the first, second, or third team, and you just want to boost up your numbers ahead of your contract here, you know what I'm saying. Go to UpsizeMatters.com. That is UpsizeMatters.com. Hey, get your girth on. We'll take a break. When we come back, final half hour of the program, what to watch on this day in history. Ooh, a very special on this day in history. Then we'll cross talk with Styles and Watkins. We'll do all that right after this.